So I'm back on the journey today, focusing in on the new features that were shown to us in our Battlefield 5 reveal. If you guys haven't had a chance to check out my first video where I go into depth discussing the new fortification feature, I show the ins and outs of that new toolbox gadget that DICE is going to be introducing to us in Battlefield 5. There's been a lot of new information that has shown up past that reveal that we saw. There's been a lot of information from the Game Changers community alongside the press that had their own reveal for them that was prior to the reveal that the public got. So there's been a lot of additional information that is still coming out even today. So what I'm trying to do in these videos is filter through all of them, get all the information from all their perspectives, and basically condense it down into one topic for each video so we get a better image on what this Battlefield gameplay is going to be like. The gameplay is really important, and that's what we're all kind of looking for. So I'm trying to detail that as best as I can, get us geared up for when EA Play shows up for us on June 9th. In this video, I'll be talking about the game modes that have been revealed to us that are going to be in Battlefield 5, primarily the new one called Grand Operations. This new form of operations is trying to build upon the success that the operations had on Battlefield 1. Now, to begin to explain this, just like the original operations from Battlefield 1 had 2 maps that you could play on, this new form of Grand Operations will have the exact same amount of maps. So no more of those third extra map to play on like Oils of Empires, but it's going to maintain 2 maps for this specific new Grand Operations mode. How this new form of operation differs from the operations of Battlefield 1 is by the addition of a familiar game mode on the battlefield that will be played out in the operations itself. So to give you guys an example, let's take the operations of Devil's Anvil, where you play on Verdun Heights and Fort de Vaux. You first start off on Verdun Heights, you begin to push up through those 3 sectors, and once you've completed that, you move on to the next map, Fort de Vaux, and begin to push the sectors from there to complete this operations. However, in Grand Operations, once you push through those first 3 sectors on Verdun Heights, you then will stay on the exact same map and play a completely new game mode on that map. So the new game modes could be like Frontlines or Conquest Assault. Once you finish that game, you then move on to the next map. In this example would be Fort de Vaux, where you play another game mode, and if the winner is not decided yet, you then have the possibility to play a 4th game mode. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on that possibility of that 4th game mode yet. Let's just focus on those first 3 game modes. What are they? What is DICE introducing here? Are they new? What is going on here? Because this is definitely a very larger version of the operations that we're familiar with. So right now, I've heard 4 different game modes that can be changed interchangeably in this form of operations. I'll talk a little bit about the flexibility of these game modes in a little bit, but let's just first talk about those 4 game modes. The first I heard is Airborne, the second is Conquest Assault, the third is Frontlines, and the 4th is Breakthrough. But from my understanding of it, that's just the rebranding name of the operations from Battlefield 1. I'm pretty sure about that. It seems like it might be getting lost in all of the new branding name of this Grand Operations, but from my understanding of it, it's the classic operations from Battlefield 1, just renamed Breakthrough. Now, I'm not going to elaborate on the game modes that we're familiar with here. Obviously, this Breakthrough Operations, essentially game mode, is the exact same operations from my understanding of Battlefield 1. We all know what Conquest Assault is and what Frontlines is. I'll elaborate a little bit on what Airborne is. This game mode essentially is you paratrooping behind enemy lines, trying to take out the enemy player's artillery. So the only way you spawn into the game is by actually parachuting down onto the playing field. Now, the game I've heard described over and over again as the first game that you'll play in this Grand Operations is Airborne, but I also have heard that DICE has the ability to switch up the alignment of these game modes. So there could possibly be a case where the game mode Airborne isn't the first game you play, but maybe the 3rd game that you play in this Grand Operations. So that is definitely pretty interesting, even though I do like this airborne operations being in the first game mode, as I feel like it kicks off the operations a little bit better. I mean, essentially from what I'm hearing is you're paratrooping in behind enemy lines, destroying that artillery, getting your battalion behind you, the ability to advance, and that would essentially could transition really well into the next game mode, which is Breakthrough, or the original operations we played on BF1, where you're trying to push up those 3 sectors from the consequence of that first game you just played, Airborne, where you could tear down those big artillery guns and help your team advance. So I think that is kind of interesting, yet to be known yet. Again, from what I'm hearing, some type of mixture from there, a lot of Airborne being described as the first game mode, but as well hearing a lot of interchangeability on DICE's end to begin to mix it up a little bit and not keep the Grand Operations stale. I do want to interject here really quick and not leave the impression that because we're getting 2 game modes on one map, that it means we'll be rinsed and repeating a lot of the game space for us to be playing on. I do think DICE is going to want to designate parts of this Grand Operations maps to be specific for each game mode we'll be playing. We've seen some problems like this before in the past with the game mode Frontlines that came out during the They Shall Not Pass DLC, and how DICE tried to introduce that new mode to some of the vanilla maps and discovering that it didn't play out all too well. Now again, this is just my speculation on this, nothing has been confirmed from DICE, but again, I'd imagine they would try to avoid this, as the experiences of the past have proven that some of these game modes do not incorporate too well for maps they were not designed for. Now you may ask yourself if this Grand Operations game mode is going to be like the operations from Battlefield 1, where you find yourself getting stuck in maybe a certain sector and you end up using up the 3 battalions that you have, and then from there the game ends. If that's going to be the same case for this Grand Operations, and that is not the case. In a situation like this, what will end up happening is you will be guaranteed to move on to the next sector. So you have a guarantee to begin to move on to those 3 game modes, and like I had alluded there earlier, there will be a possibility of a 4th one that I'm not quite there to talk about yet. You may ask yourself now, if you're guaranteed to move past the first 2 game modes, what's the point of playing well? Well, there is a point. If you do play badly, there will be consequences. Those consequences can appear in different forms. Maybe if you don't play well by dying a lot in that first game mode, you'll have less spawns in the next game mode. Maybe in that first game mode you get a lot of vehicles that get destroyed, while in that next game mode you may have less vehicles that you can spawn in with. All of this will be taken into account to that final 3rd game mode to hopefully give your team that extra advantage to get the win. If by chance that 3rd game mode at the end of it leads that both teams are equally tied, you then will move on to a special 4th game mode that is called Last Man Standing. And essentially, that basically describes it pretty well for what it is, and you will spawn into the game with only 1 spawn with a limited amount of health and ammo, and it's essentially last man standing wins the game. So once you die, and you will be in that spawn screen, I'm assuming, waiting to see who the last man to stand on whichever team wins the game. So it will definitely be a pretty epic moment, in my opinion, if you make it to that last man standing game mode, as I'm sure everyone will be watching their own team duel it out until you get to that epic maybe 1 versus 1 battle, or maybe if a lot of players die on the enemy's team, then it might be a 3 versus 1 battle. You have all these type of situations that will happen, but the point is you're going to spawn in with only 1 life, not a lot of health from what I'm hearing, and not a lot of ammo either. From what I'm hearing exactly, you only have 1 clip of ammo, so definitely going to amp up the tension for that last man standing game mode, and it's definitely an interesting take from DICE's perspective with this whole battle royale trend that's been going on lately. Again, this will only happen if that third game mode you're on ends up being a tie. So there's a guarantee you're going to go through 3 games. You're guaranteed to experience both the maps. But playing on that 4th game mode is not guaranteed. Now, I heard it being told to me that there's a possibility of this happening maybe every 3 to 4 games on that 3rd game mode where you'll end up a tie. So that's an interesting type of rate that I think DICE is going on here, because from what I'm hearing, this being a very epic kind of moment, I feel like if that's played too much, people might actually get bored of that last man. But if it's not played enough, people will be dying to play it. So I think having that really healthy balance where not every time you play it is there, but you do play it enough where you're not just, you know, wondering if you're ever going to be able to play the game modes that are actually in the game that you bought. So I think it's an interesting approach DICE is taking here, and actually has me pretty excited to experience this grand operations from what I'm hearing as of right now. Just to give you guys a little bit more of an idea of how intense this last man standing game mode could be, if having a limited amount of health and supply and only being able to spawn into once in the game wasn't intense enough, I've heard they are going to implement dynamic weather during this last man standing. So definitely going to be very intense if that's going to be the case, especially if we only see dynamic weathering during this last man standing game mode. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But I had made mention a little bit earlier about the ability for DICE to remain flexible in the order of game modes that would appear to us. So not necessarily will be the case where we'll be seeing Airborne show up as the first game mode, but DICE could possibly switch up these game modes around a little bit. Well, to elaborate on that a little bit more, it seems like DICE is going to go even further with their flexibility, where I've heard they will possibly have certain operations where specific classes can't be used, or maybe the medic class can only use this certain type of rifle. I even heard quoted where there could be an operations where you'll have no ammo in. So I'm not sure if I maybe need to understand the context of that quote or what, but it seems like you could possibly spawn in with no ammo at all. If that's the case, will you be able to maybe go up to a supply depot and get supply there? Or is it just a purely melee only type of operations? I don't really know yet. I'm still trying to decipher clearly and understand everything that I'm hearing from what's being brought out. But, you know, definitely from the most part, what I can interpret from this is that DICE has a lot of flexibility here. They could possibly, you know, bring things in to be more historically accurate to maybe the era where that operations is taking place at. Maybe there's certain rifles that were used during that time, so to bring in other type of rifles might not be as historically accurate, so they could kind of bring in a form of historicity in that way. Or if they want to lean more on a certain time, they could bring in more of just gameplay wise and maybe make it only a tank versus tank type of operations. I don't really know. It seems like DICE is opening it up for the possibility where they can flex a little bit. So that's what I'm at least getting from that. Don't take it that DICE is only going to do history as the, you know, the pure form of this operations where you can only use one weapon, or the other way where it's going to be purely just, you know, whatever type of gameplay you want to play, if it's tanks versus tanks or infantry only. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that from what I'm hearing, it seems like DICE is just opening up for the possibilities. So that is pretty interesting. Now, I have heard grand operations described as a narrative journey, and my understanding of that is that means cutscenes. So those cinematic scenes you would see before the operations began on BF1 is what you should begin to see again in this grand operations. Now, what I'm unsure about is if it's going to be between each game mode or between each map, because that's the difference of possibly 4 cutscenes to 2 cutscenes. But again, that is the type of theatrical, immersive feeling that DICE is trying to portray to us. That is as well why we're hearing this type of 4 days operations experience you're going to be able to play out. That is of course not 4 actual days, but to represent the 4 different game modes you're playing, trying to get into the actual experience of the soldier, how each of those battles would take a day's worth of time. So again, they're trying to give you that immersive feeling here. Do expect this Grand Operations to be a pretty big deal for us in Battlefield 5, kind of like how Operations was in Battlefield 1, but probably even more. If you remember in BF1, later in its life cycle, DICE introduced the Operations campaigns that had these exclusive battle packs you could only get through that campaign itself, where you're able to unlock puzzle pieces for melee weapons. So we already know there will be unique items unlocked through this specific Grand Operations. So like I just said, do expect it to be a pretty big deal. Now this finally brings me into the other game modes that I said I would talk about that would be returning to Battlefield 5. And what you can expect to see is Team Deathmatch and Domination, of course. We're also going to be seeing the return of Majority Rule Conquest, and that is all really the game modes that I'm hearing being confirmed coming back. We've heard the game modes like Frontlines and Conquest Assault being incorporated to Grand Operations, but I'm not sure if that's going to be only to Grand Operations or if they're going to diverge and be available to play by themselves in their own unique game mode. So yet to be known about that. I am hearing that there will be even more game modes coming out, so that will be kind of interesting to see, as Battlefield 1 game modes after Frontlines, in my opinion, weren't all too great. So again, we'll be on the lookout what DICE does here. Again, the Grand Operations is going to be the big one for us on BF1. There's going to be a lot to it. Expect that first kind of DLC that will be coming out, described as the Fall of Europe. For this huge Grand Operations to be a big part of that. But that is a run through for you guys off of what I'm hearing about this new game mode. Feel free to let me know what you guys have heard in the comments down below. Any really big information, I'll be sure to pin it up on the comments above. But that is it for you guys in this video here. Again, I always appreciate you guys being here. I am Livin', and I'll catch you guys again later. Peace.